Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Pause for Thought. Last week we looked at how we can trust that the Bible that we have in our hands today is an accurate account of what the authors in the first century actually wrote. Those of us from a faith background also believe, in addition to this, that the scriptures were written under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And it's not just an ordinary ancient text that has been well preserved, well passed down and transmitted, if you like. Today we're going to look at the second part of this talk by Wesley Huff, but a different aspect of the trustworthiness of the Bible. Namely, how do we know that it isn't all made up? Theoretically speaking, it could be a very, very old made-up story that has been accurately transmitted down through the centuries. Wesley shows that the Gospels are trustworthy eyewitness accounts from Matthew, Mark, and John. And in the case of Luke, based on thoroughly and well-researched eyewitness testimony. So sit back, relax, as we go through this article by Wesley Huff. A couple of years ago, I gave a presentation at the University of Toronto on the topic of the Bible. The title of the talk was, Good News or Fake News? Can you trust the Bible? After the presentation, a student came up to me and simply said, I think you've shown pretty persuasively that the Bible isn't fake news, but that doesn't mean it is by default good news. Up until this point, I hope you've seen that the history of the text of the Bible gives us a great deal of confidence that what we have now is what the original authors wrote all those millennia ago. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that what they wrote was true. We could, hypothetically, have the most widely attested, most accurately transmitted, most textually verified document in all antiquity, and it could all be a lie. What if we do have what the original authors wrote, and those same authors simply made it all up? How do you go from a trustworthy text to a truthful message? The answer to that question lies in the details of the Bible. For the sake of time and space, let me concentrate on the Gospels. We have 4 Gospel biographies of Jesus' life: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Arguably, the whole Christian message centralizes and focuses on Jesus anyways. So concentrating on the Gospels capitalizes on the central point of what Christians believe. There are a number of key details that we can look at throughout the text of the Gospels themselves that help us to identify what scholars refer to as verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is a long word that simply means the likelihood or probability of something being true. Historians search through written documents and archaeological artifacts to try and look for the verisimilitude of a particular event having truly taken place, or persons actually having existed. When we're talking about the Bible, we can see identifiers that point to particular instances of verisimilitude. One key indicator that we can evaluate is whether the Gospel authors show familiarity with times and places they purport to be writing about. A lack of this type of knowledge would immediately raise red flags for the historical authenticity of the context we read about in the Gospels. We today have incredible access to a whole range of knowledge about geography, culture, landmarks at our fingertips. So particularities in the text of the Gospels may go unnoticed or ignored because we either take them for granted or we do not see the value of certain details. However, this unprecedented level to access the information was not available in the ancient world. If an individual wanted to describe a place, time, or geographical landmark accurately, they would almost always have had to have been there themselves, or at a minimum, be connected with someone else who had. Geography, for example, can tell us a lot about the accuracy of an account that claims to be written by individuals coming from a particular area. All four Gospel authors reference towns, regions, bodies of water, and landmarks in exactly the places they should be in proportion to one another. Even something as simple as all four Gospels specifically mentioning trips going up to Jerusalem reveals authenticity. Jerusalem had an elevation of 750 meters above sea level, and so therefore traveling to Jerusalem would have been a trip upwards. Similarly, as Mark and Luke mention leaving Jerusalem is then correctly described as going down. Even more on point is Jesus' use of topography in his parable of the Good Samaritan, found in Luke 10. It starts off by saying that a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and that a priest was going down the road. This is significant because Jericho is the lowest city on earth, over 250 meters below sea level. Going from Jerusalem to Jericho involves a descent of 1 kilometer. To describe this trip as going down is more than just an expression. It is factually accurate. The story also assumes Jesus' audience is aware of a direct route from Jerusalem to Jericho, which is exactly what we find in the archaeological record and would have been a well-known route to the locals and Jesus' immediate audience. This may seem inconsequential, but it reveals volumes about the truthfulness of where the information is coming from. Namely, it shows local information. If we compare the biblical Gospels with the later apocryphal Gospels, we see a stark difference. Unlike the dozens of place names, accuracy of descriptions of topography, and distance between locations, we see a conspicuous lack of any such detail in the non-biblical Gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, names Judea once with no other place names given. Others, like the Gospel of Judas or Mary, name no locations. Although the Gospel of Philip does name Jerusalem 4 times, along with the usage of Nazareth and the Jordan, this is hardly noteworthy. Jerusalem was the most famous religious capital city of this time. Nazareth became famous as the home of Jesus, and the Jordan was the main river in the area. None of these descriptions gives any type of noteworthy familiarity with the places Jesus lived, taught at, or visited during his earthly ministry. And we don't have to stop with geography. The biblical Gospels also match with local terminology within both Jewish and Gentile regions. Popular names of individuals for the times and the locations, Jewish colloquialisms, botanical descriptions, and usage and examples of proper financial transactions, practices, etc. of the specific areas in question. These may seem inconsequential to the modern reader, but for the historian, they communicate a great deal. What these types of seemingly trivial details all tell us is that the authors were either living in the place and times they were writing about, or they were going to lengths to connect with it and interview those who did. The details they get right are some of the hardest details to remember after the fact, and are certainly the first things to leave out if one is writing in a completely different location and time. And we don't have to stop there. Corroborating details, what we sometimes refer to as undesigned coincidences, references to James, Jesus, and others by writers outside of the New Testament, and even the argument from fulfilled prophecy, all add up to point to the genuineness of the biblical gospel accounts. If the gospel authors manage to get the smallest of details correct concerning their story of Jesus' life, is it that much more of a stretch to consider they got the bigger details correct as well? I personally do not think so. The particulars for me personally have the air of verisimilitude painted all over them. I hope if you've gotten this far, you've seen two things loud and clear. First, that what we have now in modern translations of the Bible is what the original authors wrote. And secondly, that what they say is true. A first century itinerant Jewish preacher named Jesus of Nazareth truly did walk the dusty streets of Galilee 2,000 years ago. More than that though, this man made some pretty audacious claims to be God himself. He then also predicted his own death and resurrection, and then proceeded to do it. And as many have pointed out before, men who raise from the dead have more authority and credibility than those who don't. This makes Jesus' question recorded in Matthew 16, Mark 8, and Luke 10 of "Who do you say I am?" pivotal. For if what we read in the Bible is not only trustworthy but also truthful, then it means that who we say Jesus is will have implications that transcend simply believing historical facts about the verisimilitude of a collection of ancient books.